Today, we are very honored to be continuing that discussion with our distinguished guest, Sung-Hyun Moon. He is the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Embassy of the Republic of Korea, for a discussion of the lessons learned through Korea's successful response to coronavirus. I hope today's discussion uncovers new insights into potential responses while highlighting the key role that the U.S. ROK alliance can play in the months ahead. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for joining us. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Mian Oh, who is the Director and Senior Fellow of the Asia Security Initiative in the Scowcroft Center. She will begin today's discussion. Dr. Oh?
Can everyone hear me? Thank you, Barry, and thank you everyone for joining us virtually for today's discussion. I'm honored to be speaking today with Sung-Hyun Moon, Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of the Republic of Korea, to discuss lessons from Korea's coronavirus response and prospects for US ROK cooperation in responding to the global COVID-19 pandemic. We are fortunate that the quick and effective national responses to early COVID-19 outbreaks in Asia, in particular in Korea, as well as Singapore, Taiwan, and Japan, like Barry laid out, provide a diverse range of potential response measures for us to evaluate, from rapid scaling up of testing to preemptive travel restrictions to innovative uses of telecommunications technology. Measures taken across the region raise critical questions about the importance of timing, scalability, technology, transparency, and misinformation and disinformation in the crisis response. How quickly can we adopt similar measures, or is it too late? Can we scale them up for a country as large as the United States or a region as large as Europe? This is not only a key time for the United States to work together with allies and partners to save lives, but also an opportunity for the United States to demonstrate leadership through effective cooperation at a time when the unfolding public health, geopolitical, and economic crisis threaten to shift key dynamics in long-term US-China strategic competition. Effective cooperation with allies and partners today can better position the rules-based international system to address the challenges of a changed world following the end of the pandemic. My goal is for today's deep dive into the Korean response to the COVID-19 to explore lessons learned while also analyzing how the United States can take these lessons and leverage them in cooperation with its closest allies and partners to combat not only this pandemic, but future crises as well. I'm eager to jump into today's on-the-record discussion, but before we begin, I'd like to remind our audience how they can submit questions for Ambassador Moon. You can submit your questions via Twitter using the hashtag #ACCoronavirus, hashtag #ACCoronavirus, or you can submit your questions via Zoom's private chat function. Just click the chat button at the bottom of your screen, type your question in the chat box, and send it to our meeting's host. Please include your name and affiliation when you send your questions. We'll then turn to your questions during the second half of the discussion. As a final note, if you experience technical difficulties with Zoom, you can also watch the live stream of this event on the Atlantic Council's YouTube channel. With that, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Ambassador Sung-Hyun Moon. Before coming to Washington, D.C. as DCM, he was the ambassador to the Czech Republic. Prior to that, Ambassador Moon held a number of other prestigious positions in the Korean government, including Secretary to the President for Foreign Affairs in the Office of the President, as well as Director General for North American Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Moon, thank you so much for being here today. We've heard a lot about different measures taken by governments around the world in response to natural COVID-19 outbreaks. To start us off, could you please walk us through the measures implemented by the Korean government during this crisis? What are the main drivers for the success story? How was the Korean government able to flatten its curve of the cases and control domestic outbreaks quickly and effectively?
Okay, thank you, Doctor, for that kind introduction. I'm the DCM of the Korean Embassy, and then I have led Embassy Task Force. I have led the Embassy Task Force for addressing this coronavirus for the last 4 weeks. And our main job to maintain task force is to monitor the situation in the United States. At the same time, how we can work together, to fight against this coronavirus between Korea and the United States. As you all know that the global pandemic is still raging around the world, and Korea, although Korea is the early victim, Korea used to be second in terms of the total number of the positive patients, but now, today actually it ranks number 10. And then recent trend suggests that our infection rate is flattening. That said, that we still face many challenges, so we will continue to be alert and innovative and cooperative in this fight. Before I just responding to the question of the Dr. O, let me first start with where Korea stands now. As of March 25th, Wednesday, total confirmed cases are 9,241 with 131 deceased. So the mortality rate is 1.42%. One of the unique characteristics of the Korean case is that a large portion of the confirmed cases is accounted for a specific single religious group called Shincheonji in Daegu City. Shincheonji-related positive patients are more than half of the whole Korea's confirmed cases, that is like 56%. And Daegu City alone accounted for 71% of the whole positive cases. Since the first case was identified in January 19th, it surged to 909 cases on February 29, mainly because of the above-mentioned reason. In just 3 weeks, however, on 23rd of March, the number of new cases dropped to 64 a day. So far, Korea is the only country with a population of over 50 million that has slowed the spread of virus and flattened the curve of new infections without shutting down the country nor the city, without imposing the extreme personal movement restraints, without closing airports or taking other authoritarian actions. Every country has different socio-economic and political features, so that they must take those features into consideration in developing the most effective measures to fight the coronavirus. Korea is a relatively small country, about the size of Indiana state, but populous with over 50 million inhabitants who are extremely well connected to the internet. We are politically democratic, so must be accountable to the people, economically vibrant, and important to the global supply chain, and also quite socially cohesive and disciplined. The government considered all of these factors in developing our response. In addition, Korea has first-hand experience of this kind of pandemic because of outbreaks of both SARS in 2003 and MERS in 2015. But we learned valuable lessons then and were able to strengthen our national public health system to be prepared for the next outbreak. We still made some mistake, but through trial and error, we could successfully adapt our response to be more effective. Now I would like to turn to that what kind of lessons learned from the Korea. But before I go into some specific aspects of our kind of success story, I would like to just list up some general lessons we learned from fighting against COVID-19. We need to be humble in our fight because it is unprecedented in its scale and seriousness. Don't be boastful about the short-term success or victory. This is a long-term battle, and we have to remain alert if we want to be a winner in the end. Secondly, cooperation from the public is essential, and the government must be transparent and responsible to maintain that trust. Then international cooperation is also the key to defeating this global pandemic. In this globalized world, we need a coordinated global response rather than nation-focused one. particularly, the impact of the COVID-19 on the global economy is very worrisome. I don't know how we will overcome economic fallout, but it will require us to work together, and every government needs to exhaust all necessary fiscal and monetary policy measures. Now, I would like just, touch upon some specific, success story coming out of the Korea's experience. As you know, that recently New York Times carried one quite interesting article on May 23rd, which well explained how South Korea could be successful in its fight against this pandemic. Also, recent Financial Times editorial stated that Korea's massive testing, which is essential to coping with the disease, should be copied around the world. So, in the case of the Korea, in the case of Korea, we have some IT-related measures was very much useful in fighting against coronavirus because, every Korean citizens were advised to install a so-called self-diagnostic application in their mobile phone so that they can track all those tests for the possible patient is traveling around so that other people can just avoid that kind of path so that to protect themselves. At the same time, as many articles pointed out that this massive testing was really useful in identifying early patients of the coronavirus. And then also, that we developed like a test, the drive-through testing. And also recently, we also introduced that walk-through testing facilities, not only in the airport, but also in other parts of the Korea. So that all these kind of some new development also very much helpful for us to effectively address coronavirus disease in Korea.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Moon. I'd like to remind our audience quickly once again to submit your questions via Zoom's chat or Twitter. Thank you. And Ambassador Moon, so thank you so much for sharing lesson learned from South Korea and then its experience with dealing with the coronavirus and the specific element that specific characteristics that Korea has been able to employ so far. And could you please tell us a little more about Korea's lesson learned and then how the United States can actually implement that into this country. I'd like to mention the President Trump and President Moon's phone call this week, and then President Moon shared South Korea's coronavirus experience in a teleconference of the G20 summit. So if you have any policy recommendation about how South Korea would like to share lessons with the United States and other countries where the pandemic crisis is still intensifying.
I think, each country has like a different socio-economic and then political features. So that, I don't know, that how much Korea's experience can be copied around the world, including United States. But at least, I want to make a couple of points that it can be applied to every country in a sense. First of all, as I mentioned before, that public trust is really important in this fighting. That is why, my government keep emphasizing the two principles. One is like a transparency and the other one is openness in dealing with this disease. So that this, principle can be kind of general principle for any country to fight against the coronavirus disease around the world. And then secondly, in the case of some these technical aspects which Korea developed, such as drive-through facilities or like work-through and then other like testing application and so on, it depends on the situation where that country is situated in a sense. Like, in the case of driving through testing facilities, I understand that originally this driving through is invented in the United States, but while we are addressing the coronavirus, that Korea one doctor, when he participated in the conference, he just, tried to introduce these drive-through facilities in taking out the samples from the people without being exposed to any types of risk. So that this drive-through testing can be applied in the case of the United States. As we see, now many US states are adopting these drive-through facilities in their own state. And then you mentioned that the recent telephone conversation between my president and President Trump, they just, talk to each other about how we can work together to defeat this coronavirus. At the same time, how we can also, globally, combine ourselves to address not only, this health crisis, but also, global possible, global like a recession. So that my president shared our own experience with President Trump, and then President Trump appreciate our efforts, but at the same time, he requested some medical stuff can be exported to the United States, because now I understand the United States seem to be lacking some types of test kits and so on. So that now, both countries are working together how we can provide those kind of the medical equipment to the United States as early as possible. And also you mentioned that actually today there was like a G20 summit meeting, a teleconference meeting was held. My President Moon actually suggested kind of 3 points. One is that global community need to work together to find out like a vaccine and then a remedy as early as possible. Secondly, he mentioned that we need to expand our like macroeconomic measures, including fiscal measures. And thirdly, he said that even if we are still fighting against this virus, but we also need to open our economic activities so that he just suggested that at least like a businessman can travel around without being restricted because of this coronavirus. Those are kind of 3 suggestions my president made during the G20 teleconference.
Thank you. So I have a question from Barry Pabol, and which is some of them you just laid out already, but then I'd like to share his question, and then like to ask you to speak a little more in terms of the US-ROC alliance. His question goes, should countering pandemic and other viral challenges to our security be considered one of the new primary purposes for the United States ROK alliance and strategic partnership?
Mm-hmm. As you know that ROK-US alliance has been called like a global strategic alliance. That means that Korea and the United States has closely cooperated each other to work together in these global challenges, such as like terrorism, such as non-proliferation, such as this public health crisis, such as like this climate changes and so on. But as we now going through this global pandemic, I'm pretty confident that this public health topic will be another great area for the United States and Korea need to work together. Particularly, Korea has its own uniqueness in a sense in terms of developing this IT technology, which is suitable for addressing these types of the global pandemic. While United States has like a global leadership, which can be very effective, in particular in addressing this possible global economic recession. So that definitely, I agree that this public health field should be one of the fields that Korea and the United States need to work together in the near future.
Thank you. And you mentioned earlier about you mentioned the New York Times article and then the drive-through centers, and you shared a little bit that you are President Trump and President Moon in their call, and then they talk about the drive centers, and then I believe that at one of the first speech from President Trump about this pandemic crisis, he mentioned South Korea's drive-through centers. So is there any sort of cooperation or potential collaboration between the 2 countries going on, or is it under consideration, or is it any ongoing discussion between the 2 countries or any other countries in the world?
You mean in terms of these drive-through facilities?
So sharing Korea's know-how, technical know-hows, and its experience.
I don't know exactly what types of the cooperation is going on, particularly in the field of these driving through facilities, you know. But this is not that much, I mean, complicated facilities, so that I think if you have a wheel, I mean, it can be easily installed in any part of the world. But to make that facility work effective, you need, I mean, some test kit, you need some sample extracting like materials and so on. So that now I understand that both Korea and the United States working on how we can increase the kind of the production of the test kit, so that because test kit is kind of the first-hand kind of defense line in a sense, you know, I mean, to attack this coronavirus. That is why both countries are talking to each other through the many different channels, like health department channel, also like embassy channel, foreign ministry channel. We are working on it.
Excuse me, we have one more question. So have COVID-19 changed Korea's strategy for its key role in global supply chains for technological components? So for instance, Hyundai Motors and Samsung and SK, they had to temporarily shut down its manufacturing plant in South Korea because they were not able to receive parts from China. And then Samsung, they had to move some of their manufacturing functions to Vietnam because of this pandemic crisis. So could you please share anything in terms of this supply chain disruptions and then Korea's role?
You know, I mean, because of this global pandemic, I could expect that there will be some shortage of this global supply chain. Not only, I mean, in the field of the Korea's company, including Samsung and Hyundai, but also, I mean, to other like very important industries. So that now, I mean, that the Korean companies are trying to look for the way out, how they can supplement this lack of the supplies, particularly coming from the China at the early part of this coronavirus. As you know that the Hyundai automobile has its major factory in Ulsan area, so that the first couple of weeks of the coronavirus outbreak, that their factory should shut down because lack of these supplies, which is supposed to be coming from China. But like after just 1 or 2 weeks later, that they just managed to find out some substitute from that part of the automobile from other countries, so that I'm pretty sure that those, I mean, very competent, I mean, Korean companies will try to find out all those necessary kind of components coming from the other part of the world.
Sorry, the next question. Are there any worries about North Korea during the crisis? Might they see this as an opportunity for a major provocation, or is there a concern regarding North Korea becoming unstable from the virus?
You know, in the case of North Korea, we have very, I mean, limited information, limited and accurate information what's going on inside North Korea for this coronavirus. But a couple of news outlets, I mean, testified us that they also seem to be suffering from the coronavirus, but we don't know how serious it is. But as you can see, that recently North Korea has involved again in launching short-range missile. So that is definitely, I mean, not the kind of the wise options. But I think, I mean, even with, I mean, this coronavirus, I personally don't think North Korea will be destabilized. I mean, but they will manage to control their own situation.
Okay. And the next question. This is the second time in 20 years that a major global pandemic originated in China. how can the United States and ROK work together to try to prevent yet another recurrence of a China-originated viral threat?
I don't know. Actually, I don't have an answer to that question. But one thing that we need to remember is that this is kind of global pandemic, so that instead of the criticizing whatever countries, it could be China, it could be Korea, but we need to find out the wise way how we can address together with all members of international community. I think that is something that Korea and the United States can do together. Particularly recently, Deputy Secretary Mr. Bigan started the kind of telephone talks with key allies in Asia, including Korea, Japan, Australia, and other countries. Every week, it started actually last week, so that this week they will have another weekly kind of telephone talks. This is kind of way, that how our allied countries work together, to share the information, to try work together to find, vaccines and remedies, and then at the same time to help the global economy to be recovered as early as possible, and so on.
Okay. How is Korea working with Italy or other European countries?
Both countries, when I just look back on the past couple of weeks, that both countries, they should be busy in tackling their own issues. So that I don't know how much, they can communicate to each other, but definitely there should be some communication, how we can share the information, share lessons from each other. But recently, in Washington D.C., we have been talking to Italian embassy in Washington D.C., so that they just approached us that ask some information, ask for some test kits, and then other questions to be directed to us, so that in that day, we are just exchanging views and then information, then how we can successfully overcome this global pandemic.
Thank you. And we have a question on your earlier remarks. Could you please elaborate a little more on Korea's experience with the 2015 MERS outbreak? What key lessons were learned during that crisis?
The most important lesson was that without getting the public trust, no government measures will be effective. So that is, the key lesson that we learned. At the same time, at that time, there was some confusion for even health workers, how we can duly address this contagious disease in Korea. So which strengthened our preparation for addressing this coronavirus 19 issues now. So that at that time, one of the things that I want to mention here is that lots of the complimentary remarks putting on Korea's response, but particularly this mass testing is one of the kind of the key part of the our success up to now. But that was possible because because going through that this MERS 2015, that we realized that this kind of test kit is really important to be in the market as early as possible. So that when this coronavirus hit Korea in the middle of the January, more or less kind of 5 Korean companies quickly kind of developed by modifying the already existing kind of test kit, and then it was very quickly approved by the Korea FDA. So that is, the basis for Korean government, after that, to implement that mass testing, which continues to be a base for tackling this COVID-19.
Another question. You mentioned that so-called the spur spreader was the key factor in the outbreak when you were talking about this secretive religious group. How do measures taken by Korea reduce the risk that a single person can cause a new major outbreak?
That is really kind of the key challenges facing Korea right now. as you know that in the case of this religious group called like Shincheonji, also we have like Korea is pretty much Christian society now, so that there are other churches in Korea, but there is like two issues sometimes which is conflicting each other, like this safety of the public health, but at the same time this freedom of worships. So that is why sometimes government urged those churches and other organizations to restrain from their own daily kind of the activities, but some part of Korean society is resisting on the basis of that personal freedom. So there is always conflict. Which comes first, in this kind of crisis? Comes like public health or like some individual freedom and so on. But at the same time, another like area that Korea is now focusing on is that some vulnerable kind of sector of our society, such as the daily senior care center or like some call center where like many people are packed in a single space working together for several hours. So that those areas also that we are now paying very close attention to.
Thank you. And the key strengths that South Korean government was able to flatten the curve of the cases, and you mentioned openness and transparency. And at the same time, when we are talking about the technologies, also, I'm sure that the issue of privacy should come up. Mm-hmm. So on the subject of personal freedoms, what strengths do democratic countries have in responding to outbreaks?
First of all, as I mentioned before, that is kind of the transparency, at the same time responsibility to the people, so that any like a democratic country where like leaders are elected in democratic election, so that they are responsible for the requests demanded from the people. I think that is kind of first priority whenever we face this kind of the serious challenges, so that without that accountability, that we cannot just build up the public trust in addressing this topic. But without public trust, we cannot successfully, beat these types of global pandemics. So that I think that is the biggest strength that democratic societies can maintain, particularly in addressing this kind of the serious disease.
Okay. We have a question about so how the embassy has been doing, and you mentioned earlier about the task force, and so maybe if you could share a little bit how many the many Koreans living in the United States, and particularly in terms of students, we've been just seeing news, watching news that many students are returning to South Korea. But what embassy has been particularly doing with Koreans living in the United States, and then South Korean embassy also has been working with other embassies in town.
Let me first address the second topic that starting from 2 weeks ago, my embassy took some preventive measures, so that now we are doing some flexible working hours, so that half of the staffs are working today, but tomorrow they are off. Not they are off, actually they are working at home. So that also that we are taking several preventive measures. So we just set up the summer camera in front of the our embassy, or we have some sanitizers around kind of embassy buildings, so that also we discourage people traveling from Korea to visit our embassy, so that we try to do whatever we can do to make this kind of preventive measures. But at the same time, we are also closely working together with other embassies. Even while we are working at home, while working in the office, that we keep communicating with particularly neighboring embassies, such as Japanese embassy, like British and then Italian, and so on. Together with State Department, in this kind of the era of the technology, it doesn't need to be always you are in your office for working. Then for the question about how the Korean embassy or all other 9 consul generals in the United States are working vis-a-vis Korean nationals, we have, as you know, that 2.5 million Korean Americans are living in the United States. At the same time, there are many Koreans, including students, who is staying in the United States. We just keep posting in our website and Facebook and then homepage and so on to provide necessary information for them to be equipped with this situation. At the same time, we have like a regular kind of the conference with leaders of the Korean community, leaders of the Korean Doctors Association, so that how we can help Koreans who is living in the United States. But having this opportunity, I would like to make just one point. Because I recently received one telephone call from Seoul, Korea, from a Korean citizen who claimed that he believed that in the United States, Koreans who are wearing this mask was received with very cold eyes. From the American citizens. I think it might be because of that, some cultural differences and so on. But at the same time, even though it's not very much frequent occasion, but from time to time we heard from other Korean embassy in the United States that in Asian as a general, sometimes a target of that verbal, sometimes physical kind of the abuse in a sense, but I hope that this kind of the bias, xenophobia, or some prejudice should be overcome. That we can. This is the issue that we need to work together.
Yes, absolutely. One more question. How is Korea preparing for potential second and third waves of the virus in the fall and winter?
I don't know whether it can be like in the fall or winter, but as I said that now, the curve of the new cases flattened, so that recently we have just 50, 60 cases per day compared to more than 200 cases by the end of the February. But now what we can witness, in Korea is that we have like half of the cases are coming from people who is coming from European countries. So that at the same time, recently, as you might know, that March 27th, we also applied very strict kind of entry measures to the people coming from the Europe and coming from the United States. Because now, that we are more or less kind of controlling the situation inside Korea. But the second kind of resurgence could be first coming from this kind of the rampant surge, of the coronavirus in Europe and in the United States. That is kind of first kind of the challenge that we need to address. But as you mentioned, that like the second challenge could be coming in this fall and winter. But hopefully, we can find out some medicine or like some vaccines by that time.
Certainly. We've just seen the US Congress pass a $2 trillion economic stimulus bill to help offset the economic effects of the ongoing outbreak. Can you please talk a little bit about what the Korean government is doing to address or prepare for the economic challenge from the global pandemic?
As I mentioned in my previous statement, that each government should take all necessary measures, including fiscal and then monetary options. So that Korean government also has taken many, different fiscal measures, including the recently adopted supplementary budget, which amounts to that $10 billion something dollars. At the same time, my government is introducing some additional kind of funding for the companies of small and medium-sized companies, which is suffering from this coronavirus. Because, if you're traveling to Korea, not only to Korea, but also in the United States, all those like restaurants and then shut down, and then small businesses are suffering from this virus. So that we try to find out all necessary measure to help those like businesses in Korea. At the same time, our independent monetary board recently lowered the kind of base interest rate from 1.25% to the 0.75%, which is the lowest kind of the interest rate in the history of Korea. So that we are trying to do whatever we can do, to address the possible global recession. But as I mentioned before, this is the area where like international efforts need to be worked out together. In that regard, particularly Korea, is very much appreciative of the recent U.S. administration's actions, including that biggest package. At the same time, we expect the United States can take a leading role in preventing global recession, as well as like to reviving economy not only in the United States but also in the world.
Thank you. One question from the audience. So is there any possibility to delay the ongoing SMA, the burden sharing negotiations because of the outbreak of coronavirus?
I don't think so. As you know, that 2 weeks ago, I think, in Los Angeles, the negotiation team has met for another round of the negotiation. As you know, that beginning of this April, that there will be some like photo will be studied. That means that all Korean national who is working for the U.S. armies, U.S. forces in Korea will be temporarily laid off. But now we are still, we are just keep changing like views and then talking to each other through, that our negotiating team. So that hopefully, I think, we can find out good solution which can be acceptable to both countries in the near future.
Thank you. And I would like to ask you a final question. What is the biggest single takeaway from Korea's response? And then would you like to share any policy recommendations
To
the United States and other countries?
I just want to make this point again that in fighting against this coronavirus, the essence will be how we can extract cooperation from people, from citizens, from the civil society, so that I think that is kind of key for any countries. For any measures that the countries are taking, regardless of that measures, but that is key to be the winner in this game. So that's why that in the case of Korea, this transparency and openness, even it sounds like a little bit vague concept, but I would like to emphasize that is why those two principles is really important in addressing this pandemic.
Thank you. And if we have no more questions, I would like to give you an opportunity for final wrap-up comments and remarks.
Sometimes when I talk to the people around myself in the embassy or like in my family, I found that there are very much heightened fear about this coronavirus. So that even when I return back home, that my two kids are trying to avoid myself in a sense, because they are staying at home. I'm just going outside, coming in, and so on. But as Franklin Roosevelt mentioned in his first inaugural address, the only fear that we should overcome is fear itself. So that hopefully, people, not just some emotional attachment, not attachment, emotional kind of the fear for this coronavirus. But the first kind of step that we need to take is that we should face this fear and then try to find out the common ground for working together.
Thank you again. Thank you very much, Ambassador Moon, for joining us this afternoon. And thanks to all of you in the audience who joined us as well. In the weeks and months ahead, the Asia Security Initiative here at the Atlantic Council will continue to provide new analysis and recommendations for the United States and its Indo-Pacific allies and partners that can address all dimensions of the COVID-19 pandemic, public health, economic security, and otherwise. In the meantime, please stay safe and healthy, and we look forward to hosting all of you again sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.